Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to another journey through time where the past whispers eternal secrets to our present hearts. Today, we'll dive into the arid and generous lands of the Pernambuco backlands, where love blooms even among the hardest stones. Imagine for a moment a desperate widow, 3 children to raise, and a colonel with a heart apparently hardened by war and pain. Between them, a marriage of convenience that will transform into the most beautiful lesson about how tenderness can heal the deepest wounds of the soul. This is a story that teaches us that even in the most difficult moments, when everything seems lost, there exists a greater force that guides us, whether it be love, faith, or simply the courage to believe that tomorrow can be different. Now tell me, from which region of our beautiful Brazil are you watching? Leave it in the comments. I love knowing where our hearts that connect through these stories come from. And don't forget, if this narrative touches you the same way it touched me while writing it, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that warm the soul. Year 1883, São Sebastião do Cariri, Pernambuco backlands. September painted melancholy across the parched lands of Açude das Pedras. The sun, implacable as a divine judge, punished the red earth where Antonia Ferreira da Costa, Toninha to intimates, sewed another patch on her youngest son's only shirt. Her fingers, calloused from daily toil, trembled imperceptibly, not from fear, but from an exhaustion that went beyond the body. It had been 10 months since Manuel departed, taken by typhus on an August night, leaving her with 3 mouths to feed and a debt that grew like weeds after the first rain. The mud brick house, with its walls whitewashed by time and poverty, now sheltered 4 lives that balanced on the tightrope of survival. Francisco, Chico to everyone, at 12 years old, carried the responsibilities of a grown man. His dark eyes, inherited from his father, bore a seriousness that was both moving and frightening. Antonio, 8-year-old Toninho, played in the yard with pieces of wood, pretending they were horses. His imagination flew free, oblivious to the worries that consumed his mother. He was clever as an opossum and had a way with animals, a talent his late father had so admired. Maria das Dores, the youngest at 6 years old, drew with charcoal on the peeling wall. Her small hands created figures that seemed to dance. Saints, angels, and faces she said she saw in dreams. Toninha sighed, observing her daughter. The girl had inherited the gift of her Quilombola great-grandmother, that gaze that saw beyond the veil of the common world. The letter arrived on a September afternoon, brought by the postal boy who cycled leagues under the scorching sun. The yellowed paper bore the coat of arms of Santo Antonio Farm and words that cut like a sharp blade. Eviction in 20 days. Toninha's hands trembled as she read. She couldn't pronounce the words aloud in front of the children. How to explain to children that the adult world was so cruel it would tear away the only roof they knew? Chico, perceiving his mother's distress, approached slowly. His eyes met hers, and there passed a silent conversation, made of those understandings that only arise between people who share the same blood and the same sorrows. "Mama," his voice came out in a whisper. Toninha folded the letter and tucked it in her bosom. There were no words, only the dry wind that swept the yard, carrying away the dead leaves and perhaps her last hopes. That night, after the children fell asleep on the straw mat, Toninha knelt before the wooden crucifix that hung on the wall. Her tears, so long held back, finally ran free. "Lord," she murmured, "if there is a way out of this affliction, show me the path." In the darkness of the room, Dores stirred on the mat and whispered in her sleep, "A man with a wounded heart. The stones will become a garden." Toninha looked at her daughter. The girl's words always carried mysteries that only time revealed. Was that just a child's dream, or another of her visions? The wind howled outside, and Toninha felt a chill run down her spine. Something was about to change. She could feel it in the air, in that smell of dry earth that precedes the storm. But she still didn't know that, just a few kilometers away, a solitary man also looked at the same starry sky, carrying his own storms in his chest. In the main house of Santo Antonio Farm, Sebastião Tavares de Melo walked the corridors like a ghost of his own life. The colonial walls, silent witnesses to generations of Tavares, echoed only the sound of his solitary footsteps. At 39 years old, the colonel bore on his face the marks of battles that went beyond war. A Paraguay veteran decorated for bravery, he had returned home hoping to find the peace that battlefields had denied him. Instead, he found a betrayal that cost him more than any war wound. Adelaide, his wife with hair golden as wheat, was in the arms of Carlos, his own brother. The scene, caught on a December afternoon in 1869, still burned his memory like red-hot iron. The fight that followed, the push, Carlos falling strangely, hitting his head on the corner of the jacaranda table. 14 years had passed, and Sebastião still awakened some nights, hearing the echo of Adelaide's scream, "Murderer!" Donna Eulalia, his mother, never forgave him. Although Carlos had died in an accident during the fight, she blamed her older son for the death of her youngest. "You killed my golden boy," were her last words before moving to Recife, taking Adelaide with her. The farm, which once bubbled with life and laughter, became a place of heavy silences. Sebastião had freed his slaves in 1881, 2 years before the legal obligation, offering them paid work. Some stayed out of gratitude and loyalty, others left in search of new lives. Damião, former slave and now house steward, was one of the few who dared address him without being asked. A man with greying hair and calloused hands, he knew his master's moods better than anyone. "Colonel," said Damião that morning, entering the office where Sebastião examined the property accounts, "there are some lands at Açude das Pedras that you'll have to take. Manuel's widow hasn't paid what she owes." Sebastião raised his eyes from the papers. Manuel had been one of his best cowboys, an honorable and hard-working man. His death from typhus was a loss felt by everyone on the farm. "Does the woman have children?" "3, Colonel. Young boys and a little girl." Sebastião returned his eyes to the documents. Business was business. Feelings couldn't interfere with practical decisions. He had learned this lesson in the most painful way possible. "Send the eviction notice." "Already sent, Colonel, but—" Damião hesitated. "But what?" "People are saying the little girl has the gift, that she sees things like her grandmother, who was from the Quilombo up at Alto da Boa Vista." Sebastião made an impatient gesture. Superstitions. The backlands were full of them. "Send the letter. 20 days is enough for them to find another place." Damião nodded and left, but his expression showed he didn't agree with the decision. Sebastião noticed but pretended not to see. He had built his new life on coldness and detachment. It was safer that way. That night, alone in his room with high ceilings and windows that faced the abandoned garden, Sebastião looked at the wedding portrait he had never managed to remove from the wall. Adelaide smiled radiantly beside him, young and beautiful, not knowing that a few years later she would break his heart to pieces. The wind swayed the raw cotton curtains, bringing the perfume of mandacaru flowers that still insisted on blooming in the uncared-for garden. Sebastião closed his eyes and allowed himself for a moment to remember what it was like to be happy. But happiness, he knew well, was a luxury he could no longer allow himself. The stone heart he had built over the years protected him from pain, but also kept him prisoner of his own solitude. 20 days. The widow had 20 days. In the darkness of his room, Sebastião didn't know that destiny was already weaving its cards, and that very soon those 20 days would change not only the life of a desperate family, but also his own. The 21st day dawned grey, with clouds that promised rain but didn't deliver it. Sebastião mounted his chestnut horse before sunrise, determined to personally resolve the matter of the house at Açude das Pedras. There was something unsettling about that morning, a strange sensation he couldn't name. Perhaps it was the different smell in the air, or the way the Bemtevis sang with more insistence, or perhaps it was just his conscience, rarely heard, trying to whisper something he preferred not to hear. The ride lasted 2 hours. The path wound between giant stones that gave the place its name, natural monuments sculpted by time and winds. As he approached the mud brick house, he could hear children's voices playing in the yard. When he spotted the property, Sebastião pulled the reins. The house was humbler than he had imagined. Whitewashed and peeling walls, a thatch roof partially uncovered, a well whose water barely reached the bottom. But there was something touching about that small property, the attempts at beauty amid poverty. Improvised tin pots housed resistant plants. Her stick fence delimited a small yard where some chickens pecked, and on the side wall of the house, charcoal drawings created a naive gallery. Saints, stars, smiling faces. Toninha appeared at the door the moment he dismounted. She wore a simple cotton dress, but carried herself with a dignity that surprised Sebastião. She didn't lower her eyes as he expected her to do. On the contrary, she sustained his gaze with serene courage. "Colonel," she said, slightly inclining her head. "Señora Antonia." Chico emerged from behind the house carrying a water bucket. His eyes met Sebastião's with curiosity mixed with apprehension. Toninho ran to his mother's side, clinging to her skirt. "I suppose you received my correspondence," said Sebastião, maintaining a formal tone. "I did, yes, sir." "And arranged for the evacuation?" Toninha took a deep breath. Her hands found Toninho's hair in a protective caress. "Colonel, we have nowhere to go. If you give me more time, I promise that—" "Promises don't pay debts," he interrupted, but his voice came out less firm than intended. It was then that Doris appeared. The girl walked slowly toward Sebastião, her large, dark eyes fixed on his. There was something in that gaze that disturbed him, an impossible depth for a 6-year-old child. Without saying a word, Doris knelt in the red earth and began to draw with a piece of charcoal. Her little fingers moved with precision, creating forms that gradually made sense. A man mounted on horseback, a woman with 3 children, a house, and above it all, a protection that seemed to come from heaven. "You have a wounded soul," said the girl, without raising her eyes from the drawing. "But the saints can heal. Mama also has a wounded soul. You can help each other." The silence that followed was deafening. Sebastião felt as if the child had looked directly into his soul, beyond all the barriers he had built. Toninha pulled her daughter to her, afraid that the girl's words might bring the colonel's wrath. But Sebastião showed no anger. He just stood there, looking at the drawing in the earth. His right hand moved instinctively to the pocket where he kept coins, and he took out some, offering them to Doris. "To buy sweets," he murmured. The girl smiled, the first smile he saw in that place, and accepted the coins. "Will you come back?" she asked. Sebastião looked at Toninha, who awaited his answer with her heart suspended. There was something in those feminine eyes that disarmed him. It wasn't pleading, it was strength, the strength of one who fights for her children, who faces the storm with an open chest. "I will return in a week," he said, surprised by his own words. He mounted his horse without saying anything more, but at the last moment turned to Toninha. "I have a proposal to make. Think about it." And he left, leaving behind 4 hearts that beat rapidly and a drawing in the earth that the wind would soon erase, but whose image would be forever engraved in the memory of everyone who was there. Sebastião rode back with the strange sensation that something fundamental had changed in those few minutes. The stone heart that so protected him had a crack now, and through it entered a light he hadn't seen in 14 years, a dangerous light, because it made him feel again. The following 7 days passed like a disturbing dream for both. Sebastião found himself restless, walking through the empty corridors of the main house, revisiting rooms long closed. Damião observed him with growing curiosity, noticing subtle changes in his master's behavior. Toninha, for her part, spent entire nights in vigil, kneeling before the crucifix seeking answers in whispered prayer. Chico perceived his mother's tension and took on even more responsibilities, caring for his younger siblings with touching dedication. Doris continued drawing on the wall, but now her creations included a recurring figure, a tall man beside a woman and 3 children, always protected by a light she colored with yellow flower petals. When Sebastião returned exactly a week later, he found the family gathered in the yard. Toninha had combed her hair more carefully and worn the only good dress she possessed, inherited from the times when Manuel was still alive. "Senora Antonia," he greeted, dismounting. "Colonel." Sebastião looked at the children, who watched him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Doris smiled and waved timidly. "I would like to speak with you." "Alone." Toninha indicated for Chico to take his siblings inside. The boy hesitated, reluctant to leave his mother alone, but obeyed after a firm look from her. There they remained, under the sparse shade of a mandakaru, 2 adults who carried different worlds on their shoulders. Sebastião removed his hat and held it between his hands, a gesture that revealed uncommon nervousness. "What I'm going to propose may seem unusual to you," he began. Toninha waited in silence, her hands intertwined over her apron. "I need a wife, for social reasons. Society expects this of a man in my position." The words came out more blunt than he intended. Toninha blinked, not understanding where he was going. "You need security for your children, I can offer that. Are you proposing marriage to me?" Her voice came out in an incredulous whisper. "An arrangement, for 5 years. You would be my wife only on paper. You would have your own wing in the house. The boys would receive adequate education, they would never go hungry again." Sebastião spoke quickly now, as if he wanted to finish with it soon. "And what would you gain from this?" He hesitated. How to explain the solitude that consumed him? The need for human voices echoing through the empty corridors, The way Doris's smile had warmed something frozen inside him. A wife for appearances. Someone to manage the house. Tonina studied him attentively. There was more to that proposal than he revealed, she could sense. And there was also, beneath the apparent hardness, a vulnerability he tried to hide. And after the 5 years, you would be free to continue your life, with a sum that would guarantee your support and that of the children. Silence extended between them. He Bemtevi sang in the Katinga, and the wind brought the aroma of the first flowers that began to sprout with the promise of rain. I need to think, she said finally. Of course. You have until tomorrow. The brusque response made her face him with firmness. Colonel, if I'm going to consider being your wife, even if only on paper, I deserve more respect than that. I will give my answer when I'm ready. Sebastian looked at her surprised. It had been years since anyone spoke to him that way, imposing conditions, and he discovered that he admired that courage. A week then, he said, a half-smile touching his lips for the first time in a long while. That night, Tonina sought Father Antonio at the church of San Sebastian. The old priest listened to her patiently, asking questions that helped her see the situation more clearly. My daughter, he said after long reflection, sometimes God places us on paths we don't immediately understand. This man has lost his faith in goodness, and you have lost your security in the world. Perhaps it is divine will that you help each other, but it would be a false marriage, Father. It would be a marriage of convenience that could become true if there is goodwill from both parties, and your children, they deserve a chance to grow up without hunger and without fear. Tonina returned home with a lighter heart. That night, before sleeping, she kissed each of her children's foreheads and murmured a prayer of gratitude. When Sebastian returned the following week, she waited for him in the yard dressed with dignity and determination. I accept your proposal, Colonel, but with one condition. Which? My children will be treated as children of the house, not as dependents. And I want you to promise that, if at any moment you change your mind, you will give us enough time to reorganize ourselves. Sebastian extended his right hand. When she touched it to seal the agreement, both felt an electric current run through their fingers, a shiver that spoke of possibilities neither yet dared to imagine. We will marry in 3 weeks, he said, at the church of San Sebastian. And so, without knowing it, 2 wounded hearts had just taken the first step toward their own healing. October arrived with the first sparse rains, promising the end of the drought. News of the imminent wedding spread through the region like wildfire, provoking reactions that ranged from incredulity to scandal. In the main house of Santo Antonio Farm, Sebastian prepared the rooms of the east wing to receive his new family. He ordered 3 bedrooms renovated and bought simple but dignified furniture in Caruaru. Damião supervised everything with a discreet smile. It was the first time in years he had seen his master worry about other people's comfort. Rosa, the housekeeper, a middle-aged woman who had served the family for 2 decades, showed apprehension about the changes. She had grown accustomed to the silence of the house and feared the children would bring too much noise. Felizmina, the cheerful black cook who had remained after liberation, on the other hand, was excited about the prospect of cooking for a family again. It's been so long since this house heard children's laughter, she commented to Damião while preparing dinner. Maybe this will be good for the Colonel. At Açude das Pedras, Tonina prepared the children for the move with care and patience. Chico, the oldest, showed concern about the situation. Mama, what if he doesn't like us? What if he changes his mind? Then we'll find another way, my son. But for now we must have faith that this is best for our family. Tonino, excited about the idea of living on a large farm, asked 1,000 questions about horses and cattle. Dores, for her part, continued drawing, but now her creations showed a large house with many windows and smiling people. 3 days before the wedding, Donna Eulalia arrived unexpectedly from Recife. The carriage stopped in front of the church of San Sebastian on a Tuesday morning, causing commotion among the village residents. Sebastian's mother descended from the vehicle wrapped in dark fabrics, her face marked by the bitterness of years. At 62 years old, she still maintained the haughty posture of rural aristocracy, but her eyes carried a deep sadness. Father Antonio received her with courtesy, although he knew of the family tensions. Donna Eulalia went straight to the point. I came to prevent this absurd marriage. Sebastian has gone completely mad. Donna Eulalia, your son is an adult man and free to make his choices. Free? She laughed bitterly. He was never free from remorse. And now he wants to marry a peasant woman. This is degradation of the Tavares de Melo family. The priest sighed. He knew that family and its tragedies well. Love knows no social classes, my lady, and this marriage may bring peace to two wounded souls. Love? Donna Eulalia spat the word. He killed my Carlos for love, and now he wants to repeat the tragedy? Carlos died in an accident, madam. We all know that. But Donna Eulalia was no longer listening. She left the church determined to confront her son. The meeting between mother and son happened at the main house that same afternoon. Sebastião received her in the office, maintaining composure despite his surprise. Mother, Sebastião, I came to end this madness. What madness? This ridiculous marriage with this common woman. Sebastião's eyes hardened. For years he had accepted his mother's accusations in silence, carrying guilt like a cross. But now, for the first time, he felt entitled to defend his choices. Antonia is an honorable woman, more honorable than many ladies of our society. She's a gold digger. She wants to take advantage of you, and even if she were, it would be my problem. Donna Eulalia looked at him in astonishment. She had never seen him speak to her that way. Sebastião, have you forgotten who you are? You're a Tavares de Melo. You cannot lower yourself to— Enough! His voice echoed through the walls. 14 years, mother. 14 years you've blamed me for Carlos's death. I've already paid for that more than any man should pay. You killed my golden boy. It was an accident, and Carlos was in my wife's arms. The silence that followed was loaded with pain and truths never spoken. Donna Eulalia gripped the chair, her face paling. I'm going to marry, mother. With or without your blessing, and for the first time in years, I feel I can be happy again. Donna Eulalia left the house without saying another word. But on the morning of the wedding, to everyone's surprise, she appeared at the church. Dressed in grey, she sat in the last pew, her face closed but present. The ceremony was simple. Tonina wore a white dress, borrowed from the merchant's wife in the village, and wore in her hair some wildflowers that Doris had picked. The children, dressed in their best clothes, watched everything with wide eyes. When Father Antonio asked if they accepted each other as husband and wife, the answers came firm, though laden with nervousness. At the moment of "You may kiss the bride," Sebastião only lightly touched Tonina's hand, a respectful gesture she interpreted as gentleness. Upon leaving the church, Donna Eulalia approached. For a moment, mother and son looked at each other. Then, without saying a word, she entered the carriage and departed back to Recife. She will return, murmured Sebastião more to himself. Are you certain? Asked Tonina. She's my mother. Beneath all that bitterness, there's still love. That afternoon, the new family headed to Santo Antonio farm. Tonina, seated in the carriage beside her husband, observed the landscape that would be her new home. The children, excited, asked 1,000 questions. When they spotted the main house, with its tall windows and wide verandas, everyone fell silent. It was a new world opening before them, full of possibilities and uncertainties. Sebastião glanced at his new wife and saw in her eyes the same mixture of hope and fear he felt in his own chest. The marriage was consummated. Now began the true journey, learning to be a family. The first weeks at Santo Antonio farm were like a delicate ballet of approaches and withdrawals. The main house, which for years had known only the echoes of solitude, began to awaken with new sounds. Quick steps in the corridors, muffled laughter, whispered conversations. Tonina settled in the east wing with a naturalness that impressed even Rosa, the initially reticent housekeeper. She didn't try to impose abrupt changes, but gradually brought small feminine touches, wildflowers in improvised vases, the smell of freshly washed clothes, the care for details that only an experienced housewife possessed. The children's rooms quickly transformed into small personal universes. Chico organized his few books on a small bookshelf that Sebastião had ordered made, creating a study corner where he spent hours absorbed in lessons with the private tutor hired, a young seminarian from Caruaru who came 3 times a week. Tonino discovered a personal paradise in the stables. João Batista, the farm's oldest cowboy, took the boy under his protection, teaching him the secrets of handling animals. It was touching to see the passion with which the boy learned to brush horses, milk cows, and even lasso calves with a small rope made especially for him. Doris found in the white walls of the house an infinite canvas for her art. Sebastião, initially apprehensive about the charcoal drawings spreading through the corridors, soon discovered there was beauty in those naive creations. The girl drew saints and angels, but also scenes from the farm's daily life. People working, animals grazing, always with a radiant sun illuminating everything. The coexistence between Sebastião and Toninha developed in careful courtesy. They shared meals in the dining room, talking about practical matters, the children's needs, farm issues, small neighborhood events. He showed generosity with family expenses, and she demonstrated gratitude without servility. However, there were inevitable moments of tension. The first occurred on a November afternoon when Toninho, playing in the stables, let Sebastião's favorite mare escape. The animal ran through the fields, taking hours to be recaptured. Sebastião found the boy hiding behind the house, clearly terrified. The colonel's initial anger transformed into something more severe when he perceived the fear in the child's eyes. "Come here," he said, his voice loaded with military authority. Toninho approached trembling. Sebastião raised his hand, but before he could do anything, Toninha appeared. "Sebastião," she said, and it was the first time she called him by name. The boy has already learned his lesson. His eyes met hers. There was firmness there, but not defiance. It was the firmness of a mother protecting her cub. He needs to learn responsibility, and he will learn, but not through fear. They stared at each other for an eternal moment. Sebastião felt something shifting inside him, as if a very ancient wall was beginning to crack. Slowly, he lowered his hand. "João Batista will teach you to tie a halter knot," he said to Toninho. "Until you learn properly, don't go near the horses without supervision." The boy nodded, vigorously relieved. Toninha directed a grateful look at her husband, which he pretended not to notice. That night, Sebastião knocked lightly on her bedroom door. Toninha answered, wrapped in a simple robe, her hair loose for the first time since he had known her. "I wanted to apologize," he said, keeping his eyes on her face. "I lost my temper with the boy. He respects you, and fear is not respect. How do you manage to be so wise with them?" Toninha smiled, a sad but sweet smile. "I lost a husband. I cannot lose my children to fear or to the world's harshness." Sebastião nodded. There was so much he didn't understand about that woman, so much he would like to ask. But words didn't come easily to a man who had spent years talking only to horses and cattle. "Good night, Antonia." "Good night, Sebastião." December brought the true rains, transforming the dry landscape into an explosion of green. The house seemed more alive too, as if the new family's presence had awakened something dormant in its centennial walls. One morning, Sebastião found Doris in the abandoned garden at the back, planting seeds she had saved from flower drawings. The girl worked with total concentration, her little hands dirty with earth. "What are you doing, little one?" "Planting happiness," she replied without raising her eyes. "Mama said every house needs flowers, and you need colors in your life." The simplicity of the response touched something deep in Sebastião. He knelt beside the girl and for the first time in years put his hands in the earth with the purpose of creating, not just administering. "Will you teach me?" he asked. Doris smiled radiantly and began explaining about seeds and plant care, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for a war veteran colonel to learn gardening from a 6-year-old child. Toninha, watching from the kitchen window, felt her heart warm. Perhaps that marriage of convenience could become something more. Perhaps the healing that Doris had foreseen could really happen. The stones of Sebastião's heart were beginning, very slowly, to transform into a garden. February 1884 arrived with suffocating heat that seemed to suck life from the earth. The still air carried flies and the omen of diseases that always accompanied the hottest periods in the backlands. Doris was the first to feel ill. It began with a strange irritation, an unusual impatience for a normally so serene child. Then came the chills, even under the scorching sun, and finally the fever that made her little eyes shine with a dangerous glow. Toninha recognized the symptoms immediately. She had seen the same fever take Manuel just 2 years before. Panic seized her with a force that left her trembling, but she tried to disguise it so as not to alarm the other children. "It's just a cold," she lied to Chico, who watched her with concern. "It will pass." But Sebastião noticed the tension in his wife's shoulders, the way she pressed too hard a damp cloth on her daughter's forehead. The sighs she thought were discreet. "Who is the nearest doctor?" he asked on the first night of the fever. "Dr. Henrique in Caruaru, but it's very far, and at night. The roads are dangerous." Sebastião looked at Doris, who was delirious softly in the bed improvised in the living room. The girl called for saints and angels, her little hands moving in the air as if drawing invisible things. "I'm going to get him." "Sebastião, no. It's dangerous to ride at night, and she's my daughter too now." The words came out simple, direct, but carried a weight that made Toninha fall silent. It was the first time he had referred to any of the children as daughter. Sebastião left when the stars began to appear, taking only a lantern and his determination. The ride to Caruaru was 4 hours under normal conditions, but at night, through the rocky and uncertain paths, it could be much longer. He left behind a Toninha who alternated between caring for her daughter and worrying about her husband. For the first time since they married, she realized she genuinely cared about his well-being. The night was long and anguishing. Dores burned with fever, saying disconnected things about a sad man who needed to learn to smile again. Chico and Toninho took turns bringing fresh water from the well, while Toninha didn't leave her daughter's bedside. Felizmina prepared herbal teas that her grandmother had taught her, and Damião kept vigil on the veranda, awaiting his master's return. The entire main house seemed suspended in silent prayer. "My Our Lady," whispered Toninha, her hands intertwined over her rosary, "don't take my little girl. She has so much left to live." Around 3 in the morning, Dores began to convulse. Toninha held her in her arms, feeling the small body tremble against her chest. The tears, so long held back, finally ran free. It was at that moment that she heard the gallop of horses approaching. Sebastião had arrived with Dr. Henrique, a middle-aged man with graying beard, who examined the girl with professional care. "Marsh fever," he diagnosed, but we arrived in time. The hours that followed were an alternation between hope and despair. The doctor administered quinine and applied cold compresses, while Sebastião and Toninha maintained vigil side by side. It was during this vigil that the barriers finally fell between them. In the heavy silence of dawn, with only the sound of Dores's labored breathing filling the environment, Sebastião began to speak. "I had a brother," he said, his voice low. "Carlos, 2 years younger, hair golden as wheat. My mother adored him." Toninha said nothing, just held her daughter's hand and listened. "When I returned from the war, I found my wife with him, in his arms." The pain in Sebastião's voice was palpable. "I fought with Carlos. It wasn't my intention to hurt him, but he fell, hit his head on the jacaranda table, died instantly. And your wife? Called me a murderer. My mother too. Everyone thought I killed him out of jealousy." Toninha turned to look at him. In the lamplight, Sebastião's face seemed younger, more vulnerable. "And you? What do you think?" "I think that maybe I wanted to kill him at that moment, and that makes me guilty just the same." "No," she said with firmness. "Wanting and doing are different things. You're a good man, Sebastião. I see it in the way you treat my children, in the way you rode all night to fetch a doctor." He looked at her surprised. It had been so long since anyone had called him a good man. "Why did you accept my proposal?" he asked. "The real reason." Toninha hesitated, then smiled sadly. "Because I saw in your eyes the same loneliness I felt in mine, and I thought, maybe we can heal each other." Dores's fever broke at dawn. The girl opened her eyes, still weak but lucid, and smiled, seeing her parents at her side. "Papa," she said, extending her little hand to Sebastião. It was the first time she had called him that, and it was the first time in 14 years that Sebastião cried. That morning, Dr. Henrique declared the girl out of danger and left with the promise to return in a week for a new examination. Sebastião accompanied him to the gate. "Colonel," said the doctor before departing, "your daughter is a special girl. She spoke a lot during her delirium." "What did she say?" "That you had found your true family, and that now you could stop carrying sorrows that weren't yours." Sebastião returned home with a lighter heart. He found Toninha in the kitchen, preparing soup for Dores. He approached slowly, and, for the first time since they married, delicately touched her shoulder. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For helping me find my way back home." Toninha turned and saw in his eyes something that wasn't there before. Peace, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of something that could be called love. Dores recovered completely in 2 weeks, and when she returned to drawing on the walls, her creations showed a united family under a radiant sun where all the people smiled. The healing she had prophesied was, finally, beginning to happen. May brought worrying signs. The rains, which had promised abundance, stopped abruptly, leaving the earth thirsty again. The reservoirs began to lower, and the region's elders whispered about omens of a new drought. But there were more immediate dangers lurking. News arrived of bandits attacking isolated farms, demanding tribute from rural property owners. The band of Antonio Silvino, famous throughout the northeast, was approaching the region. Sebastião gathered the farm's men on a morning with leaden skies. Juan Batista, the oldest cowboy, Damião, and 8 more workers formed a circle in the yard. their grave faces reflecting the seriousness of the situation. "The outlaws are 2 days away," informed Sebastião. "They attacked Esperanza Farm yesterday. They took money, cattle, and wounded 3 men." A worried murmur ran through the group. Toninho, who was playing near the stables, stopped to listen, his 8 years not preventing him from understanding the gravity of the moment. "What are we going to do, Colonel?" asked Juan Batista. "Defend what is ours, but first we're going to protect our families." Sebastião looked toward the main house, where he knew Toninho was taking care of domestic activities, while Doris drew in the shade of the veranda. The idea of any harm coming near them made his blood boil. That afternoon, a man on horseback approached the farm. He came alone, but brought the typical arrogance of one who knows he's protected by an armed band. He was thin, with long mustaches and a cruel look, wearing a leather hat decorated with silver coins. "I'm a messenger from Antonio Silvino," he announced without dismounting. "I came to collect the tribute." Sebastião came out of the house with military bearing, his revolver discreetly accommodated in the holster. Behind him, Damião and 2 other men positioned themselves strategically. "I don't pay tribute to bandits," said Sebastião, his voice calm but firm. The messenger laughed with disdain. "Colonel, you didn't understand. It's not a request, it's a collection. 100,000 reis and 10 head of cattle. Or else what? The captain comes personally to collect. And when he comes, it's not just money he takes." The man directed a lascivious look toward the house, where he could spot Toninho on the veranda. Sebastião took a step forward, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. "Remove yourself from my lands. Now. You have 3 days, Colonel, 3 days." The messenger left, but his threat hung in the air like a stormy cloud. Sebastião knew he couldn't face an entire band of outlaws alone, but he also wasn't willing to bow to that extortion. That night, during dinner, the tension was palpable. Chico, now 12 years old and perceiving everything with precocious maturity, asked the question everyone was avoiding. "Will there be fighting, Colonel?" Sebastião looked at the boy, then at Toninho, who awaited his answer with barely disguised anxiety. "Perhaps, son, but we'll do whatever is necessary to protect our family." It was the second time he referred to the children as sons, and again the word came out naturally, without effort. Doris, who was playing silently with small rag dolls, raised her eyes and said, "The bad men will go away when they see that love lives here." The adults looked at each other. The girl's visions always brought hope, but this time, everyone hoped she was right. On the second day, Sebastião rode to neighboring farms. Colonel Macedo from Boa Esperança and Major Tertuliano from Cerote were old acquaintances of his from the Paraguay War days. Together, the 3 property owners could gather enough force to face the bandits. "The time has come to show these criminals that we are not sheep," said Colonel Macedo, a corpulent man with white beard. "I agree," supported Major Tertuliano, "but we have to think about our families too." It was decided they would concentrate the women and children at Sebastião's farm, which had the most fortified house, while the men would spread out in strategic positions to ambush the outlaws. On the eve of the confrontation, Toninho found Sebastião checking weapons in the office. She knocked lightly on the door before entering. "May I speak with you?" He raised his eyes from the cartridges he was counting. "Of course. I'm afraid," she said simply. It was the first time Toninho had admitted weakness since they met. Sebastião left the weapons on the table and approached her. "I am too," he confessed, "of dying, of losing you." The raw honesty of the response made her look at him with surprise. So much had changed between them since the night of Doris's fever. The proximity, the mutual care, the way he had truly become a father to her children. "Sebastião, Before she could finish the sentence, they heard shouts coming from the yard. They ran to the window and saw one of the cowboys arriving at a gallop. "Colonel, they're coming, the whole band!" The confrontation had begun earlier than expected. Sebastião grabbed the rifle and turned to Toninho. "Take the children to the back room. Don't come out until I return. And if you don't return..." He hesitated for a moment, then approached and delicately touched her face. "I will return, I promise." The shots began to echo in the valley when the sun set behind the mountains. Toninho gathered the 3 children in the safest room of the house, while Rosa and Felizmina prayed in low voices in the kitchen. Doris snuggled in her mother's lap and whispered, "Papa will be fine. The angels are protecting him." Toninho hoped, with all the strength of her heart, that her daughter was right once again. Outside, among the shots and shouts, Sebastião discovered he had much more to lose now than when he was just a lonely man, and that made him an even more dangerous adversary. The confrontation with the outlaws lasted until dawn. When the sun finally rose over the farm, the bandits had departed, taking only some head of cattle they managed to steal from the distant pastures. The strategy of the united farmers had worked. Antonio Silvino lost 3 men and decided the region offered more resistance than it was worth. Sebastião returned to the main house with a superficial wound on his left arm, but alive and victorious. Toninha ran to examine him, her trembling hands cleaning the blood while whispering prayers of gratitude. "You promised you would return," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "And I returned," he responded, covering her hands with his good one. "I will always return to you, to all of you." Dores appeared at the bedroom door, carrying a new drawing. A man mounted on horseback, surrounded by a golden light, while dark figures fled far away. "I knew," she said, smiling. "The angels told me Papa was going to win." The weeks that followed brought a renewed sense of security. News of the outlaws' defeat spread through the region, and Santo Antonio Farm gained even greater respect among neighboring properties. Sebastião was sought by other farmers who wanted to form a permanent militia against the bandits. But it was the arrival of June that brought the true change for the family. The traditional June festivals were approaching, and Toninha timidly suggested that perhaps they could organize something at the farm. "It's been so long since we had a party here," commented Felizmina, excited about the idea. "Since before you married the first time." Sebastião hesitated. Parties meant people, music, joy, things he had banished from his life 14 years ago. But seeing the sparkle in Toninha's and the children's eyes, he felt incapable of denying. "Do as you wish," he said, feigning indifference, but without excesses. Toninha smiled, knowing that permission represented much more than he admitted. Preparations began immediately. Chico helped organize the bonfire in the central yard. Toninho collaborated, decorating the area with colorful flags made by Dores, and even the farm workers got involved, contributing accordion, zabumba, and triangle. On June 23rd, the eve of São João, the farm was unrecognizable. Lantern lights created a magical atmosphere. The aroma of roasted corn and pain de molek spread through the air, and people began arriving from neighboring properties. Toninha appeared wearing a flowered chintz dress she had bought especially for the occasion. She was more beautiful than Sebastião had ever seen her, her hair loose falling over her shoulders and a radiant smile illuminating her face. "You look," he began, then stopped, embarrassed. "What? Beautiful," he finished, blushing slightly. It was the first time he had given her a personal compliment, and Toninha felt her heart accelerate. The party began at nightfall. João Batista's accordion, discovered to be an excellent musician, animated the quadrilles. Chico danced awkwardly with one of Colonel Macedo's daughters, while Toninho ran among the adults, stealing sweets. Dores, dressed like a little quadrille bride, was chosen to be the queen of the party. Her joy was contagious, and she insisted that everyone see her most recent drawings, now pasted on the veranda walls like an improvised gallery. "Papa," she shouted, running to Sebastião, "you have to dance with Mama." "I don't dance, little one." "But it's a party. Everyone has to dance." Toninha approached, extending her hand with an encouraging smile. "Shall we? It's just one dance." Sebastião looked around. All the guests watched them with expectation. He could refuse and disappoint his daughter, or he could try. He accepted Toninha's hand, and she led him to the center of the yard, where 4 other couples positioned themselves for the quadrille. The music began, and the pairs started the traditional movements. At first, Sebastião was tense, worried about not stepping on his wife's feet or making wrong movements. But gradually, guided by Toninha's patience and encouraging smiles, he began to relax. There was something magical about that dance. Each turn, each movement that brought them together and apart, seemed to remove a layer of the barriers that still existed between them. Their eyes met with increasing frequency, and with each look, something ignited. When the moment of balancé came, where couples face each other, swaying to the rhythm of the music, Sebastião and Toninha lost themselves completely in each other's gaze. The world around them, the music, the people, the laughter, seemed to disappear. "Antonia," he whispered. "Sebastião." The music ended, but they remained there, still holding hands, as if awakening from a dream. The guests' applause brought them back to reality, and both blushed, smiling timidly. The rest of the party passed like a happy blur. Sebastião discovered he enjoyed being surrounded by cheerful people, that children's laughter, warmed something frozen in his chest for a long time. Antonina realized she looked at her husband with completely new eyes. Around midnight, when the last guests departed, the family gathered around the still crackling bonfire. The children, exhausted but happy, dozed in their parents' laps. "It was a beautiful party," said Tonina, her voice low so as not to wake Doris, who slept in her arms. "It was," agreed Sebastião, Tonino asleep against his shoulder. "Thank you for allowing this. Thank you for reminding me what it's like to be happy." Chico, the only one still awake, observed his parents with a mature smile. For the first time since his biological father's death, he felt he truly belonged to a complete family. When they finally went up to their rooms, Sebastião accompanied Tonina to her door. They stood there in the corridor, illuminated only by moonlight entering through the tall windows. "Antonia," he began, then hesitated. "Yes? This marriage is no longer just one of convenience for me." Her heart stopped for a moment. "For me either," she confessed. They approached slowly, like two people learning to dance a new song. When their lips finally touched, it was as if all the pieces of a complex puzzle found their places. The kiss was gentle, full of promises and new beginnings. When they separated, both knew something fundamental had changed between them. "Good night, my wife," he said, delicately touching her face. "Good night, my husband," she responded, smiling. That night, for the first time since they married, neither felt lonely. Love had arrived slowly, grown in coexistence and mutual care, and finally bloomed at a Saint Jouin party they would both remember forever. On Dora's bedroom wall, a new drawing would appear the next morning, a man and woman dancing under the stars, with small hearts floating around them. The seer girl was right once again. The stones had become a garden. The autumn of 1884 arrived, bringing subtle but profound changes to Santo Antonio Farm. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had transformed into a true union, sealed not only by church vows, but by the genuine affection that grew between Sebastião and Tonina throughout the months of coexistence. December brought a discovery that filled the main house with expectation. Tonina was expecting a baby. The news was first received by Doris, who one morning calmly announced during coffee, "Mama has a baby in her belly. It will be born when the corn is ripe." Tonina almost choked on her coffee, looking astonished at her daughter. "How do you know that, girl?" "The Quilombo grandmother told me in my dream. She said it's going to be a strong boy, just like Papa." Sebastião stopped cutting bread and looked at his wife, a mute question in his eyes. Tonina nodded timidly, confirming what her daughter's intuition had revealed. The smile that illuminated Sebastião's face was like sunrise after a long night. He got up, walked to Tonina, and kissed her delicately on the forehead, then knelt and kissed her belly, still showing no signs of pregnancy. "Our son," he murmured, amazed. Chico and Tonino exploded in exclamations of joy. The prospect of having a little brother excited them, and Doris smiled satisfied for having been the first to know the secret. The following weeks were of preparations and redoubled care. Sebastião showed himself extremely protective of Tonina, insisting she rest more and delegate heavy tasks to Rosa and Felizmina. The main house, which for so long knew only silences, now bustled with preparations for the new family member. In January 1885, unexpected news arrived from Recife. Adelaide, Sebastião's first wife, was very ill. Donna Eulalia wrote a brief letter, informing that the former daughter-in-law was given up by doctors and asked to see Sebastião one last time. Sebastião read the letter in silence, his face closing in the hard lines that Tonina hadn't seen for months. She approached, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You need to go," she said simply. "I don't want to leave you, especially now. She was your wife. She deserves your farewell." Tonina's generosity surprised him. There was no jealousy or resentment in her voice, only understanding. What if I come back different?" "You won't come back different. You'll come back in peace." Sebastião left for Recife the next day, promising to return in a week. The trip was long and painful, each kilometre bringing him closer to a past he had tried to forget. He found Adelaide in a small house in the Boa Vista neighbourhood, consumed by tuberculosis that had left her unrecognisable. Her golden hair was greyed, her face was hollow, but her eyes still maintained the beauty that had once enchanted him. "Sebastião," she whispered when he entered the room. "Adelaide." They looked at each other in silence for a long moment. There was so much to be said, so many hurts to be healed. "I need to ask your forgiveness," she said, her voice weak. "For what?" "For everything. For Carlos, for blaming you, for not being the wife you deserved." Adelaide then told the truth she had kept for 15 years. Carlos had seduced her with promises of taking her to live in Europe, exploiting her youth and her dissatisfaction with life in the interior. The relationship had lasted months when Sebastião discovered them. "I was scared," she confessed. "When Carlos died, I thought you were going to kill me too. That's why I screamed those horrible things. And my mother. Donna Eulalia only wanted to protect Carlos's memory. She never knew the truth about us." Sebastião remained by his ex-wife's side until the end, which came 3 days later. Adelaide died whispering requests for forgiveness, and he finally managed to forgive, both her and himself. The funeral was small, just some friends and Donna Eulalia. After the ceremony, mother and son finally talked. The truth about Carlos and Adelaide, revealed by Sebastião, broke the last wall of resentment between them. "My son," said Donna Eulalia, crying for the first time since Carlos's death, "how can you forgive me? Because I learned that holding grudges only poisoned my heart, and now I have a family to love. Your new wife, is she good to you? She's the best woman I've ever known, and she's expecting your grandson." Donna Eulalia smiled through her tears. 15 years of separation were coming to an end. When Sebastião returned to the farm, he found Toninha on the veranda, her belly already beginning to show signs of pregnancy. She ran to his arms, and he kissed her with a passion that came from the certainty of having found his true home. "How was it?" she asked. "It was liberating," he replied. "Adelaide died in peace, and my mother wants to meet you and the baby. And how do you feel?" "I feel I can finally be completely happy without guilt." That night, Doris had another of her prophetic dreams. She woke in the morning with a radiant smile and announced, "The baby will be born on St. Anne's Day, and Grandma Eulalia will be here to meet him." Once again, the seer girl was right. Donna Eulalia arrived in June, bringing hand-embroidered layettes and a finally healed heart. The reunion between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law was touching. Two women who had loved the same man, each in her own way, now united by the desire to see him happy. The baby was born on a July 26th morning, St. Anne's Day, exactly as Doris had predicted. João Batista Tavares de Melo came into the world screaming with strength, announcing his arrival to the entire farm. Sebastião held his son in his arms and cried openly, not from sadness but from joy so intense it wouldn't fit in his chest if it didn't transform into tears. "Our son," he whispered to Toninha, who smiled, exhausted but radiant. "Our family," she corrected. Outside the room, Chico, Toninho and Doris waited anxiously to meet their little brother. Donna Eulalia helped with the birth, and now rocked her grandson with the affection she had saved for so many years. Santo Antonio Farm bustled with joy. João Batista's birth symbolized not only the continuation of the Tavares de Melo family, but the complete healing of all the wounds that had marked that house. That night, Sebastião looked through the bedroom window and saw the complete family gathered on the veranda. Chico read to Toninho, Doris drew another of her smiling saints, and Toninha nursed the baby under Donna Eulalia's loving gaze. He had found everything he had always searched for without knowing: a true home, unconditional love, and the peace that comes from a heart finally in harmony with itself. The stones had transformed into a garden, exactly as Doris had prophesied on the first day they met. The summer of 1885 was generous with Santo Antonio Farm. The rains came in the right measure, the pastures turned green, and the main house had never known such joy. João Batista grew strong and healthy, filling the corridors with his babbling and smiles that melted any heart. Donna Eulalia had decided to stay longer, enchanted with her grandson, and discovering in Toninha a daughter she never had. The two women shared the care of the baby and the house with a harmony that surprised everyone, especially Sebastião, who watched them with silent gratitude. "I never thought I'd see my mother smiling again," he commented with Toninha on an afternoon when they watched Donna Eulalia playing with João Batista in the garden that Doris had planted. "Love heals everything," replied Toninha, settling better in her husband's arms, "even the oldest wounds." August brought preparations for João Batista's baptism. Sebastião wanted a grandiose ceremony, worthy of the first official son of the Tavares de Melo, but Toninha suggested something simpler and more community-oriented. "Let it be a party for the entire region," she proposed, "to show that our family is open to everyone." The idea pleased Sebastião, who saw in it an opportunity to consolidate the bonds of friendship and respect he had built with neighbors during the outlaw episode. Father Antonio was invited to celebrate the ceremony in the farm's own chapel, a small colonial construction that had been renovated especially for the occasion. The chosen godparents were Colonel Macedo and his wife, Donna Alzira, old friends who had supported Sebastião in the most difficult moments. Dores actively participated in the preparations, creating special drawings to decorate the chapel. Her artworks, now recognized throughout the neighborhood as having a special touch, transformed the sacred space into a colorful gallery of saints and angels. "This girl has a true gift," commented Father Antonio, admiring the drawings. "It's not just art, it's prayer made with hands." Chico, now 13 years old, helped organize the reception that would happen after the ceremony. He had become a responsible and studious young man, respected by the farm workers and admired by the neighbors' children. Toninho, always clever with animals, was in charge of preparing the mounts for the guests. On the baptism day, August 15th, Feast of Our Lady of the Assumption, the farm dawned decorated like a fairy tale setting. Colorful flags fluttered in the morning breeze, wildflowers decorated all the tables, and the aroma of typical foods spread through the air. Guests began arriving early. Entire families came from neighboring farms, merchants from the village of São Sebastião do Cariri, ex-combatants who had served with Sebastião in the Paraguay War, and even some of the farm's former slaves, now free workers, who insisted on honoring the event. Mãe Benedita, the Quilombola midwife who had assisted João Batista's birth, arrived bringing a special gift, a protection amulet made with sacred herbs and ancient prayers. "So this boy grows strong and protected by the Orixás and the saints," she said, placing the amulet around the baby's neck. Toninha accepted the gift with gratitude, recognizing in the African tradition a wisdom that complemented her Catholic faith. The ceremony in the chapel was moving. João Batista, dressed in a linen christening gown embroidered by Donna Eulalia, behaved like a little angel throughout the entire liturgy. When Father Antonio poured the blessed water over his little head, the baby smiled as if understanding the solemnity of the moment. "João Batista Tavares de Melo," pronounced the priest, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." The godparents spoke with emotion about their responsibilities in the child's Christian education, and Sebastião felt his eyes water, seeing his son being officially welcomed by the faith community. After the ceremony, the party took over the farm's yard. There was music, dance, abundant food, and much joy. Sebastião circulated among the guests, receiving congratulations and embraces, his transformation noted by everyone who knew him before the marriage. "Colonel," said Major Tertuliano, "you are a completely different man. Marriage has done you very well." "Family has done me well," corrected Sebastião, looking at Toninha, who chatted animatedly with the other ladies. "I learned that happiness is not a luxury. It's a necessity." Dores, as always, was the star of the party. Her drawings attracted everyone's admiration, and she distributed small creations as baptism keepsakes. One of the ladies present suggested the girl should learn formal painting, an idea that Sebastião immediately accepted. Toninho impressed the adults with his knowledge about horses and cattle, demonstrating techniques he had learned with João Batista, the cowboy. They already spoke of him as the future farm administrator. Chico conversed with the older boys about his studies and the possibility of continuing education in Recife. Sebastião and Toninha had decided he would have all the opportunities money could buy. When night fell and fireworks illuminated the starry sky, Sebastião asked for silence to make a toast. "Friends," he said, raising a wineglass, "today we celebrate not only my son João Batista's baptism, but also our family's rebirth. 2 years ago, I was a lost man, prisoner of grudges and solitude." He looked at Toninha, who held the baby in her lap. "This extraordinary woman and these wonderful children taught me that love is the only force capable of healing any wound, of building bridges over any abyss, of transforming stones into gardens." Applause echoed through the farm, and many guests had tears in their eyes. "May this boy grow in a united family, in a prosperous community, and in a more just and fraternal world," continued Sebastião. "And may we all always remember that, no matter how dark the night, dawn always comes for those who have faith." The toast was accompanied by shouts of joy and applause. The party continued until late hours, with music, stories, and fraternization. When they finally retired, the family gathered in Sebastião and Toninha's room. João Batista slept peacefully in the cradle beside the bed, Dores snuggled between her parents, and the 2 older boys squeezed into the big bed. "Thank you," whispered Sebastião, kissing each of the children's heads. "For what?" asked Toninha. "For teaching me what a true family is." Donna Eulalia appeared at the door, smiling at the scene. "May I join you?" she asked timidly. "Of course, Grandma," said Doris, making space for her. And so, 5 hearts that had found each other by destiny, plus a grandmother who had rediscovered love, slept embraced on a night that would be forever engraved in their memories as the moment they knew, without a shadow of doubt, that they had found paradise on earth. João Batista woke once during the early morning, but was lulled back to sleep by his mother's gentle lullaby, protected by the love of a family that had been born from the unlikely union between a stone heart and a golden soul. The baptism had sealed not only the boy's entry into the Christian faith, but also the certainty that this family was destined to write a love story that would cross generations. The year 1886 brought prosperity and growth to Santo Antonio Farm. João Batista, now 1-year-old, crawled through the corridors of the main house, bringing laughter and commotion with each discovery. His first wobbly steps were celebrated as a victory for the entire family. Chico, at 14 years old, had become a young man of striking presence. Sebastião decided to send him to study at the Jesuit college in Recife, an opportunity the boy embraced with enthusiasm and seriousness. His weekly letters were awaited with anxiety by everyone on the farm. Toninho consolidated himself as the family's future cowboy. At 10 years old, he already knew how to ride like a grown man and demonstrated natural instinct for dealing with cattle. João Batista, the cowboy, had become his mentor and second father, teaching him all the profession's secrets. Doris, at 8 years old, revealed herself as an extraordinary artist. Sebastião had hired a drawing and painting teacher who came from Caruaru twice a week. The main house's walls transformed into a permanent gallery of her works, which impressed any visitor. Donna Eulalia had decided to fix permanent residence at the farm, transforming one of the north wing rooms into her personal space. Her presence brought refinement and tradition to the house, while her experience helped Toninho with administrative tasks. In April, news arrived that filled the family with joy. Toninho was pregnant again. The second pregnancy was calmer than the first, with Donna Eulalia taking on many of João Batista's care so the daughter-in-law could rest adequately. "This time it will be twins," announced Doris one morning, with the natural certainty of her visions. "2 girls beautiful as flowers." "How can you be so certain?" asked Toninho, smiling. "The Quilombo grandmother appeared in my dream. She said the girls will bring much luck to our family." Sebastião had already learned to trust his adopted daughter's intuitions. He immediately began preparing 2 cradles and renovating an additional room in the children's wing. Summer brought important political changes for the country. Discussions about slavery abolition intensified, and Sebastião followed the debates with growing interest. Although he had already freed his slaves years before, he felt proud to have anticipated a transformation he considered inevitable and just. "Slavery is a national shame," he commented with Colonel Macedo during a visit. "Brazil needs to modernize." "You were always more progressive than us, Sebastião, but I recognize you were right." In December, the twins were born exactly as Doris had predicted. Ana and Benedita, names chosen in honor of Saint Anne and the Quilombola midwife who had become a family friend, came into the world on a sunny morning, one after the other, with only 15 minutes difference. The birth was again assisted by Mãe Benedita, who arrived the day before with her ancestral wisdom and healing herbs. Donna Eulalia also helped, creating an atmosphere of feminine support that calmed Toninho throughout the entire process. Sebastião held both daughters in his arms simultaneously, moved by the perfection of the small beings he had helped create. João Batista, now a 1.5 years old, observed everything with curiosity, without completely understanding that his little sisters had arrived to stay. "Our family is complete," murmured Toninho, exhausted but radiant. "It's perfect," agreed Sebastião, delicately kissing his wife's forehead. Celebrations of the twins' birth extended for a week. Neighbors, friends, and farm workers paraded through the main house to meet the newborns and congratulate the parents. Doris created special drawings for each visitor, portraying protective angels she said surrounded the little sister's cradle. Chico returned from Recife for the year-end holidays and was enchanted with his sisters. At 15 years old, he already demonstrated the maturity of a young man, helping with the children's care and showing himself an exemplary older brother. "Papa," he said in a private conversation with Sebastião, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for our family." "You don't need to thank me, son." "I do. You saved us. And more than that, you loved us as if we were your blood children. You are my heart children, which is stronger than any blood." The conversation definitively sealed the bond between them. Chico promised to honor the Tavares de Mello name when he finished his studies and took on responsibilities in the farm administration. Toninho also grew in responsibility. At 11 years old, he already effectively helped with field work, demonstrating natural leadership among other young workers. Sebastião saw in him a future administrator, capable of further modernizing the property's operations. Doris continued surprising everyone with her artistic gifts and visions. Her paintings began to be known in the region, and some wealthy families from Caruaru commissioned portraits and religious works. The money earned was saved in a special account for her future education. Christmas 1886 was the happiest Santo Antonio farm had ever experienced. The main house bustled with 6 children, including the twins who already smiled and babbled, and 3 generations of adults who had learned to truly love each other. Sebastião organized a special supper, inviting not only the family, but also the farm workers and their families. The large dining room table was extended to the terrace, creating space for everyone. "This year," he said when proposing a toast, "we celebrate not only Christ's birth, but also the birth of a new era for our family. We are 7 now, united by love and faith." Donna Eulalia raised her glass with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for allowing me to be a grandmother again," she said. "You gave me back my reason to live." Toninha held Anna in her lap while Sebastião rocked Benedita. João Batista played with small wooden toys at his parents' feet. Doris drew in a new notebook she had received as a gift, and although Chico and Toninho were physically absent, one in Recife, the other helping with organization, they were present in spirit. When midnight arrived, everyone gathered in the farm's chapel for midnight mass. Father Antonio celebrated with special emotion, recognizing in the Tavares de Mello family an example of how love can transform lives. "This family," he said in his homily, "teaches us that there is no small or great love, only true love. And true love always multiplies, never divides." After Mass, while the younger children slept and the adults savored a last coffee, Sebastião and Toninha walked to the garden that Doris had planted in the family's first year. The flowers had grown exuberantly, creating a colorful bed that perfumed the entire side of the house. In the full moon's light, the garden seemed magical. "Do you remember when your daughter said the stones would become a garden?" asked Sebastião. "I remember. And she was right, as always. It wasn't just about the flowers," he reflected. "It was about our hearts." Toninha snuggled in her husband's arms, observing the main house illuminated by the windows where their daughters slept peacefully. "We are blessed," she murmured. "We are a family," he replied, "and that's the greatest blessing of all." The year 1887 was beginning, and with it would come new challenges and joys. But at that moment, under the backland stars, Sebastião and Toninha knew they had built something unshakable, a home where love grew every day like the flowers in Doris's garden. The seer girl's prophecy had been completely fulfilled. The heart stones had transformed into the most beautiful garden 2 wounded souls could cultivate together. March 1888 arrived loaded with changes that would echo throughout Brazil. The winds of abolition blew stronger each day, and at Santo Antonio Farm, Sebastião followed political events with the certainty of being on the right side of history. The twins, Anna and Benedita, now 2 years old, filled the house with their laughter and mischief. João Batista, at 3 years old, revealed himself a clever and curious boy, always following his older siblings, trying to participate in their adventures. Chico, at 16 years old, was concluding his studies in Recife and already showed interest in politics and law. His letters spoke about abolitionist debates in the capital and his admiration for leaders fighting for the end of slavery. Toninho, at 12 years old, had become indispensable in cattle administration. João Batista, the cowboy, proudly said he had never seen a boy with so much natural talent for ranch work. Doris, at 10 years old, continued surprising everyone with her artistic abilities. Her paintings of popular saints were sold at the São Sebastião do Cariri fair, and the money was saved to fund her future studies at a fine art school. But it was in April that news arrived that would change everything. Donna Eulalia was ill. It began with a persistent cough that everyone attributed to a common cold, but soon revealed itself as something more serious. The doctor called from Caruaru was categorical: pneumonia. At 68 years old, Donna Eulalia's constitution was no longer the same, and the disease advanced rapidly. Sebastião spent entire days beside his mother, in a silent vigil that reminded him of the care she had given him during his childhood. Toninha organized the house so everyone could take turns in care, keeping the children nearby so they could say goodbye to their grandmother. "Sebastião," said Donna Eulalia on an afternoon when the fever had temporarily subsided, "I need to speak with you." "What is it, mother?" "I want to ask your forgiveness for all these lost years, for all the bitterness I placed between us." "Mother, that's already forgiven long ago." "I know, but I need to say it, and I need to say also how proud I am of the man you became. This family you built is the greatest proof of your goodness." Sebastião held his mother's hand, feeling how fragile and cold it was. "Take good care of them," she whispered, "and let them take good care of you. That's what makes a true family." Donna Eulalia passed away on a May morning while sleeping peacefully. Sebastião was at her side, holding her hand, when he felt the exact moment she departed. A solitary tear ran down his face, not of despair but of gratitude for having had the chance to reconcile with her. The funeral was well attended. Donna Eulalia had won the respect and affection of everyone in the region during the years she lived on the farm. Chico returned urgently from Recife to participate in the ceremony, and the entire family united in pain and longing. Adores created a special drawing to place on her grandmother's tomb, a smiling lady surrounded by angels, with arms extended, protecting a large family. It was her way of expressing that Donna Eulalia would continue caring for everyone, even in heaven. Some weeks after the funeral, news arrived that the entire country awaited. The Golden Law had been signed. Slavery was officially abolished throughout the national territory. Sebastião gathered all the farm workers in the central yard. Although they had been free for years, he wanted to officially mark that historic moment. "Friends," he said, "today is a day that will enter history. Our country finally recognized that all men are born equal in dignity and rights." Damião, now with completely white hair but still strong, spoke on behalf of everyone. "Colonel, you freed us well before the law, but today I feel my country finally recognizes me as a citizen." "You were always citizens here," replied Sebastião, "and you will always be part of this family." The celebration that followed was spontaneous and moving. Music, dance, and much joy took over the farm. It was the official end of an era of national shame and the beginning of new hope. That night, Sebastião and Toninha talked about the future. With 6 children to raise and educate, they faced the challenge of preparing them for a Brazil that was rapidly changing. "Chico already talks about studying law to help build more just laws," commented Toninha. "And Toninho will be one of the new generation farmers who will treat their workers as partners, not as property. Dores will spread beauty throughout the world with her art. And the little ones, well, they will grow up in a country where being a woman won't mean having fewer rights. João Batista will be the symbol of this new era," added Toninha, looking at the son who slept peacefully in the cradle. "A boy born free, educated in love and respect." Sebastião embraced his wife, feeling deep gratitude for everything they had built together. "Do you know what the greatest victory is?" he said. "What? It's not just that our children were born free. It's that we also freed ourselves. You from poverty and fear, I from bitterness and solitude. And now we're going to raise these children to be even freer than us. Free from prejudice, hatred, greed, free to love without measure." A baby's cry interrupted the conversation. It was Anna, one of the twins, calling for attention. Sebastião got up to get her, and soon Benedita also awakened, as always happened. With a twin in each arm, Sebastião returned to Toninha, who arranged João Batista between them in the bed. There they were, the 5 newest members of a family that had been born from the unlikely encounter between 2 wounded hearts. "Do you remember the first day we met?" asked Toninha. "Dores offered me a drawing and said I had a wounded soul, and that the saints could heal." "It wasn't the saints who healed me," he said, delicately kissing his wife's forehead. "It was love." "Your love? These children's love?" Outside, the Backlands night extended its starry mantle over Santo Antonio farm. Inside the main house, a family slept in peace, protected by the love that had grown among them like the flowers in Doris's garden. The final test had been overcome. Donna Eulalia's death, instead of separating, had united hearts even more. And slavery's end symbolized not only the country's freedom, but the complete freedom that everyone in that house had conquered, the freedom to love without fear, to dream without limits, to build a future based on hope. The stones had definitively transformed into a garden, and it was a garden that would flourish for generations. December 1890. 2.5 years after abolition, the golden dawn spread over Santo Antonio farm like a divine blessing. Sebastião, now 46 years old, walked slowly through the garden that Doris had planted 7 years before, observing how the flowers had multiplied and spread throughout the entire side of the main house. The changes had been profound and wonderful. Chico, at 18 years old, had graduated in law and returned to the farm with modern ideas about agriculture and labor relations. Toninho, at 14 years old, had become Sebastião's right hand in cattle administration, demonstrating impressive maturity. Doris, at 12 years old, was already known throughout the region as a prodigy artist. Her paintings of popular saints were commissioned even from Recife, and she had begun giving drawing classes to the village children. The room that had been transformed into an atelier constantly bustled with her creativity. The twins, Ana and Benedita, at 4 years old, were the joy of the house. Spirited and intelligent, they already showed distinct personalities. Ana was more introspective and liked books, while Benedita was adventurous and loved playing with the farm animals. João Batista, at 5 years old, revealed himself a perfect mixture of his parents. He had Sebastião's determination and Toninha's sensitivity, besides demonstrating early signs of natural leadership. The farm workers already joked that he would be the future colonel of the property. Toninha, at 33 years old, had completely flourished. The woman who once lived in poverty and despair had transformed into a respected matriarch, whose opinion was sought by other families in the region on matters ranging from children's education to domestic administration. The farm prospered like never before. The modern methods introduced by Chico, combined with Sebastião and Toninho's practical experience, had tripled productivity. More importantly, all workers received fair wages, had decent houses, and their children attended the school Sebastião had built on the property. On that special December morning, the family gathered for a unique occasion, the official inauguration of Dona Eulalia Tavares de Melo Rural School, the region's first educational institution open to all children, regardless of color or social condition. Father Antonio arrived early to bless the new building, a simple but well-planned construction, with 3 classrooms, a small but well-organized library, and a courtyard where children could play. Doris had decorated the walls with colorful murals that told the region's history. "Sebastião," said the priest, "your mother would be proud to see her name on a school that represents everything she believed in: education, dignity, and love for one's neighbor." "That's what she wanted," replied Sebastião, moved, "for our family to be an example of how people can change for the better." Guests began arriving around 10 o'clock. Entire families came from neighboring farms, village merchants, authorities from São Sebastião do Cariri, and even the new mayor of Caruaru. It was a day of celebration for the entire community. Chico, elegant in his white linen suit, gave the inaugural speech. His oratory impressed everyone, showing the refined education he had received, but without losing simplicity and connection to his backland's roots. "This school," he said, "represents more than education. It represents hope. Hope that the next generations will be more educated, more just and more prosperous than previous ones." He paused, looking at Sebastião and Toninha. "My parents taught me that true wealth is not in what we accumulate, but in what we plant. Today we plant seeds of knowledge that will flourish for generations." Toninho, though younger, also spoke briefly about the importance of combining formal education with practical knowledge. His simple but profound words especially touched the parents of children who would attend the school. Doris presented the murals she had created, explaining each scene with an eloquence that surprised for her 12 years. Her works told the region's history from the first colonizers' times to slavery abolition, always emphasizing themes of hope and overcoming. After the official ceremonies, there was a great party in the farm's yard. Music, abundant food, and much joy celebrated not only the school, but everything that family had built together. João Batista, dressed in a special outfit for the occasion, ran among the adults distributing smiles and greetings. The twins, in matching dresses but different colors, played with other children, showing the same ease for making friends that characterized the entire family. At the end of the afternoon, when the last guests departed, the family gathered on the main house veranda. The sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in golden and rosy tones that reflected in the new school's windows. "Do you know what moves me most?" said Toninha, observing the school building. "What?" asked Sebastião. "It's seeing how everything began with a drawing by Doris in the earth. She said the stones would become a garden, and now, look at this." Sebastião followed his wife's gaze. Beyond the literal garden that flourished beside the house, there was the metaphorical garden they had cultivated, a united family, a prosperous community, a school that would educate hundreds of children, workers treated with dignity, and a love that had grown and multiplied beyond any dream. "Dores," he called, "come here, my artist." The girl approached, her eyes shining with the day's happiness. "Do you still remember the first drawing you gave me?" asked Sebastião. "I remember, Papa. It was our family protected by the saints. And you said I had a wounded soul, but that it would heal. And it healed, didn't it?" She smiled. "You are very happy now." "I'm more than happy. I'm at peace." Sebastião embraced his daughter, then extended his arms to include the entire family in the embrace. There they all were: Chico, the future lawyer and leader; Toninho, the born administrator; Dores, the visionary artist; João Batista, the heir to the name and traditions; Ana and Benedita, the little ones who represented the future without limitations. "Do you know what the greatest lesson I learned is?" said Sebastião. "What, Papa?" asked the children almost in chorus. "That love doesn't divide, it multiplies. When I began to love you, I didn't have less love to give. I had more love to share with the entire world." Toninha kissed her husband's face, remembering the first time they saw each other, when she was a desperate widow and he a man hardened by pain. "And now what are we going to do?" she asked. "Now we're going to continue planting," he replied. "Planting love, planting hope, planting dreams, so our children have an even better world than ours." Night fell over Santo Antonio Farm, but it wasn't a night of ending. It was a night of continuity, of promises fulfilled and new beginnings always possible. Dores looked at the stars that began to appear in the dark sky and whispered, "Thank you, Quilombo grandmother. Thank you for telling me in dreams that everything would work out." In the silence of the Backlands night, one could almost hear an answer carried by the wind. "Love always works out, girl. Always." Sebastião and Toninha remained on the veranda after the children retired, observing the new school and garden illuminated by the full moon. 7 years had passed since that afternoon when they met, and the journey had been more wonderful than either could have imagined. "Sebastião," said Toninha, "do you believe people can really change?" "I believe people can heal," he replied. "And when they heal, they find who they always were deep in their hearts." "And who were you always?" "A man capable of loving. I just needed a family to teach me how." They kissed under the stars, the same gentle kiss full of promises from the first São João party, but now enriched by years of complicity, overcome challenges and shared joys. Santo Antonio Farm slept in peace that night, protected by the love of a family that had proven miracles happen when wounded hearts meet and decide to heal together. The garden that Dores had planted would continue growing through future generations, spreading beauty, perfume, and the eternal lesson that, no matter how hard the heart's stones may be, love always finds a way to transform them into flowers.